All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. But please, if you joined, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, where you're calling in from, and where you're based out of. And while you're doing that, I am excited to welcome you to part 2 of our webinar series, Resource Equity in Action. Today, we'll be talking about communicating your message in an advocacy campaign or effort, and this is hosted by the Alliance for Resource Equity. As just a quick point of background, the Alliance for Resource Equity is a partnership between EdTrust and Education Resource Strategies, or ERS. And we're focused on making sure that school systems and communities are working together to mobilize the right distribution and allocation of supports to ensure that all students have high quality learning experiences in school. And so we do this by focusing on 10 dimensions of resource equity and provide tools and resources to help advocates and districts think about resources in a bit of a broader way. So expanding our understanding of resources to think about people, time, capacity, money, and also considering questions not only around how much, but also how well money is being spent and allocated. And last week in part 1 of our webinar series, we discussed ways in which data in resource equity campaigns and efforts is critical, first to identify student needs, solutions, and then also center these needs in advocacy efforts. And so we heard from ERS. They shared a new diagnostic tool as part of the Alliance for Resource Equity Toolkit. And then we heard from Julia Zamith at Rodell. And she shared her experience working and communicating with data in Delaware on school funding specifically. And there was something she struck me that I think kind of ties us really well into this next session. She focused a lot on and emphasized the need to effectively, of course, use and interpret data, but also communicate effectively with that data in service of a larger message. And I think that lends itself to lead into today's discussion around how to develop, that resource equity message. And so, I know we all know that messaging is imperative, but just as a way to frame our time together, a few quick reasons why strong messaging is imperative in advocacy. First, your messaging serves as your North Star, guides your work through all of the engagements that you'll have, both the conversations where, you're aligned, it's advocate to advocate and you're on the same page, but also the tougher conversations when you're kind of working to get someone on your side. And so it provides that direction and that clarity and oftentimes inspiration on what you stand for and why you're doing it. The next is also nailing down your message goes a long way to building coherence among fellow advocates or aligned partners. So when there are clear messages, everyone's kind of rowing in the same rowing the boat in the same direction. So the scope of the issue, its impact, and what you're asking for. Next, your message is what establishes the direct connection from your position to your audience. So it can really directly inform your audience's understanding of the issue, but also the role they play in that issue. And so it makes it clear that you and them have a stake in this and you want them to engage in a certain capacity. To that end, I think messaging, has the power to help shape a narrative. Narrative change is incredibly powerful. And so when you're able to show up with that data, with the research, with the real life stories, I think, can shift conversations at different tables to ensure that solutions are evidence-based and also grounded in the realities of your community. And then lastly, helps build awareness, influence, and move people to action and make them kind of do the thing that you're asking them to do and mobilize. So with that, a few learning objectives for today. And so to meet these objectives, my amazing colleague, Andrea Ramirez, I'll hand off in a moment. She'll be sharing what makes for effective and compelling messages. and then walk through a new Alliance for Resource Equity tool that helps you create your own custom like messaging for an issue in your community that you're advocating on. And then she'll talk a bit about responding to opposition, and then we will all have a chance to practice with the tool to get comfortable with it in service of these learning objectives. And so with that, I will turn it over to Andrea.
Hey everyone, super excited to be here with you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and let me know if you're able to see the slides.
You're good.
Awesome. So super excited to be here with you all today. My name is Andrea Ramirez, and I serve as a communications manager at the EdTrust within our partnerships and engagement team, which supports our state communications efforts. Super excited for the opportunity to share how you can leverage our Alliance for Resource Equity case-making decks to craft effective messaging that will push your advocacy and policy priorities and efforts forward.
And just sorry to cut in, Andrea.
Yeah.
You want to switch your display settings?
Yes. I did that the first time and I didn't learn my lesson, but technology, everyone. So did it move to the next slide? Amazing. So like Shayna said, why is effective messaging a critical component? She went over the 4 main reasons. Nothing about us without us. We want to make sure that your messages are grounded in the realities of your community. Your messaging serves as a North Star. It's your guiding and grounding core message that you're trying to have your audience leave away with. Messaging has the power to drive and shape narrative. And it also is just a way to build awareness, influence, and move people to action, which is the ultimate goal for any messaging campaign. So what are the ARE case-making decks and what is its purpose? So we know that our voice is important and a necessary part of conversations on advancing equity in our schools. So the purpose of these ARE case-making decks is to help you leverage your story and community's data to make the case for advancing resource equity. It's kind of a starting point to craft and refine your messaging and includes suggested data, metrics, and templates you can use to communicate your point effectively. So the tool you're going to see today is broken down into 3 sections. We're going to go over issue and impact, building your message, dismantling opposition, which is, again, a necessary part of making sure your messaging is speaking to an audience and can dismantle any opposition or negative messages that might be thrown your way. And we're going to hit on all of these sections as well as have some time for checks for understanding and some activities where you'll actually get to engage and craft your own messages. So it's a very hands-on presentation today, and I hope that you're able to participate in those activities in whatever capacity you can today. And hopefully today we'll just provide further background information and data on one specific dimension for resource equity. So today we're specifically going to focus on positive and inviting school climates and its impact on students. And this is just a visual kind of to what Shayna mentioned of what the Alliance for Resource Equity Toolkit looks like. As you can see, ARE has a much larger toolkit that provides a roadmap for district leaders and advocates to work together to understand resource equity, conduct a diagnostic on strengths and equities across the 10 dimensions, dig deeper into potential root causes and actions, and then identify decision makers. And finally, which is what we're doing today, we're making the case and developing compelling messaging to address resource inequities in your specific community. Just some questions to keep in mind while we're going through this presentation. And the first thing we want to do is narrow down our issue and focus area and keep in mind these 4 key questions. Who is my audience and what do they value? What story do I want to tell and what message point do I want to get across? What evidence or research supports this? And what will move my audience to action? So just some reflecting questions to keep in mind. So all effective messaging has at least these three key components, and adhering to these components is by no means easy given the complexity of resource equity work in general. But the more you can do so, the larger an impact your message is gonna likely to have. So the three components are knowing who your audience is, making an emotional connection, and keeping your message simple. So knowing your audience. While it's tempting to label everyone as your audience, like most of us tend to do, the more personalized you can make the message, the more likely it will be to have an impact. So once you've identified your specific audience, consider their values or what they care deeply about, keeping in mind that this might likely differ from what you value most. And once you have your message, share it in places your audience frequents. Look for news outlets that cater to these specific stakeholders or public events your audience attends. It could be a meeting. But in these spaces, establishing trust is imperative for the strategy to be effective because your audience will only listen to your message if one, they receive it, and two, they trust you as a reliable and accurate source of information. The second key component is making an emotional connection. So while data is a crucial component, which you heard in the first webinar of making your case, behind these numbers are real people with real stories. So people respond to emotion and passion. So make sure you use it well in your messaging because the more personal and local you can make the issue, the more likely your audience will be to act. Stories are one of the most effective ways to do this. Often the most powerful stories come from the people most affected by the issue itself. In this case, it would be our students and families. When asking stakeholders to share their stories, make the process as easy as possible for them by offering training and removing barriers to participation like transportation and childcare. Offering multiple modes through which stakeholders can share their story, like virtual or written options, is helpful. Just consider also sharing your own personal story. A lot of you might be a community member, you might be a parent, you might be an advocate or a former teacher yourself. There's a lot of value in your personal story and leveraging that as a talking point as well. And then lastly is just keep it simple. Your audience can't act on your message if they don't understand what you're asking of them. So your messaging should be simple, concise, and easy to understand. This means avoiding any language that requires education speak or academic terms. We love that in the education space. We love to throw around acronyms, SEED, RJ, IEP. I was a teacher at one point, so those are very familiar to me, but oftentimes our parents and the communities we work in that doesn't really translate to them. So just being clear from the start about what you're asking your audience to do. It also means being consistent in your messaging over time and across coalitions to avoid confusing your target audience. So that was a lot of information, and we have plenty of more information to go, but I just want to pause here, a little brain break in the chat, reflecting on your own current advocacy messaging. Which of these three key elements is an area you'd like to work on? And feel free to put, it could be all of them, it could be one of them. I know personally for me, I might be good at making an emotional connection, but oftentimes I really struggle with getting a point to be short and succinct. So that's something that I personally working on. Awesome. Well, thank y'all for sharing. And just another way, if there is an area you are still working on, again, you are probably working on these messages with other people who also have different strengths. So even if I am a person that is good at making an emotional connection, there might be another person that's really good with data and pulling out a really strong point being made that I can leverage in my own talking points as well. So just leveraging the people in your coalition and in your community and work that can harp on those other areas that might not be a strength of yours is a really powerful way to get your message across. So The tool we're going to use today is the messaging triangle. Some of you might be familiar with it, some of you might not, but it's just one useful strategy. It's not the only strategy, but it's the one we're going to focus on today for structuring your messaging. So it distinguishes between two types of messages. It has your core message in the middle and your key messages that support that key core message. So when building your messaging triangle, you want to use asset-based framing to ensure you're placing the blame for inequity on systems and structures and not students and communities. And that's really, really important to remember, blaming the structures and systems that we're working in rather than the people in it. So the core message serves as your North Star. It's your main point, your goal, your value that you want to communicate to your audience. It drives all your other messaging for your audience, and it's the message that, if nothing else, you want your audience to walk away with, remembering. So if the messaging triangle is an essay, your core message would serve as a thesis for that essay. So for example, let's say my core message, what I'm trying to push is that all students have access to STEM advanced coursework. That would be my core message. All students deserve access to a high quality and advanced STEM coursework opportunities. And then you have your three key messages. So your three key messages in every message triangle are supposed to intentionally build off one another to drive your audience to support and take action towards your main core message. So the first key message identifies and establishes the issue affecting your community that you want your audience to address. It breaks down the federal, state, or local inequity you've identified, so your audience may likely not be as well versed and have a full understanding on the topic you're going to discuss. So if my core message again was all students deserve access to advanced STEM coursework, my first key message would be highlighting the issue of, schools with high number of students of color oftentimes are denied opportunities to advanced coursework opportunities that bear college credit. That could probably be your first key message because it identifies and establishes the issue affecting your community. So the second key message showcases the impact of this issue, so either broadly or one specific community, how addressing it is going to have a positive impact on students in your area. So in doing so, the second key message demonstrates why your audience should care about the issue you've raised and why they should act now to address it. So why is it important that, students of color have access to advanced coursework opportunities, especially in STEM? You could make several different cases. One of them could be that it allows the opportunity for students to pursue post-secondary careers in those fields if they have access to these courses. So second key message is making the case of why it would benefit the broader community or benefit students in general. And then the last third key message is your call to action, and you always want to have a call to action. You want to prompt your audience to act in service of your goal and explain exactly what you want them to do about the issue that you've brought to their attention. So this is just one, again, useful strategy and what we're going to focus on crafting today. So today we're going to get to create our own messaging triangles and create key messages to support our core message. So now that you know what a messaging triangle is, how do you create one? So I'm going to go step by step on how to create your messaging triangle using the information in the ARE case-making decks. So the first thing you should do is start by narrowing down your focus issue area by reviewing the Alliance for Resource Equity's 10 dimensions and key questions. So for today, we're going to focus on dimension 6, which is positive and inviting school climate. And I'm going to narrow down our focus on one specific key question, which is key question 6.1. Does each student experience a safe school with transparent, culturally sensitive, and consistently enforced rules and discipline policies? So more than likely, this key question also serves as your core message, as your North Star, because it should provide a comprehensive description of what you're advocating for and why. So creating your messaging triangle. Again, you want to identify what your core message is. And like I mentioned, we're going to focus specifically on question 6.1 of all students deserve a physically safe and emotionally supportive environment at school that includes fair and consistent rules and discipline policies. So that's going to be our core message. Now, to develop our key messages, again, these are the 3 messages that support our core message. We want to make sure that those key messages are supported with data, and the last one has a call to action. So before I move further, we're going to pause here. Does anyone have questions around how maybe I have gotten my core message using the key question here?
Andrea, I realized you can't see the chat, so nothing in the chat right now, but I'll let you know if you can, if there are.
Thank you. Great. Hopefully that did make sense. But so we have our core message. Now we're going to go through step by step how to create our key messages. So to really create our key messages, we're going to want to analyze the data metrics to help answer that key question. So does each student experience a safe school with transparent, culturally sensitive, and consistently enforced rules and discipline policies? And for that, we can look at either our district data, we can look at state level data, we can use national data. If you don't have direct district data, you can always request it. If not, rely on that state and national data to paint the picture. So for instance, looking at the percent of suspended or expelled students by school poverty level and by the percent of who are students of color could help answer that. So once you've analyzed the data, and I will say in the case-making decks, there's an appendix that has data metrics and notes and resources that you could point to if you can't find data of your own within your local community. But the next step we want to do is consider what are the available data points and which are going to speak directly to the issue. So let's suppose that Black students and students from low-income backgrounds are suspended and expelled at significantly higher rates than their white peers. We would probably use that as a really powerful data point to make the case that indeed there is an issue with the discipline policies that are happening in that district. So now that we've analyzed the data, we found the data points, analyzed them, we want to go ahead and solidify those key messages. So again, those key messages, key message 1 identifies the issue, key message 2 explains why it matters, and key message 3 advances the call to action. So in this case, what's the issue? Students of color and students from low-income backgrounds are suspended at higher rates than their white peers. Why does it matter? These discipline policies result in missed learning opportunities and they harm a student's sense of belonging. And then lastly, what do you want your audience to do about it? Our district must prioritize racially and culturally conscious approaches to discipline instead of continuing to invest in harmful zero-sum practices. So these are examples of what you could say, but again, there's 10, 20 different ways to say it. So whatever message you think speaks best to your audience, adjust as needed. And then lastly, you always want to support these key messages with the 3 S's. The 3 S's are story, statistics, and sound bites. So statistics, you always want to have a data metric to support your key message. Soundbite, a soundbite is often used in interviews, but again, you can use it in any setting you find yourself maybe running out of time and really need to get the point across. And then lastly, story, share an example of how a suspension or expulsion made it harder for a student to catch up. It can be, if you're a teacher, your own experience. If you are a parent, how have you seen students in the school that your child attends be harmed by these policies? So those are the steps to developing those key messages. And at the end, you should have a complete messaging triangle. So here we have kind of what we went over. All students deserve a physically safe and emotionally supportive environment at school. That includes fair and consistent rules and discipline policies. What's the issue? Students of color are being over-suspended and expelled at higher rates than their peers. Why does it matter? And then lastly, what is your call to action? And if you notice, all of these key messages are supported by the 3 S's of a statistic, a soundbite, and a story. So if you notice here, there are key messages and sound bites that are missing. That's going to be part of the activity we're going to have you fill in for us. And this is just a checklist that is also part of the case-making decks. So again, if you want to make sure that your messages come across to your audience and are effective, you want to make sure that it's aligned with their values, it defines the impact, it's framed in an asset-based way, it highlights the benefits, and it has a call to action. So just a checklist to keep in mind when you're crafting your own messaging triangle. And I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Take a pause, take a deep breath. That was a lot of information, but I do want to check in and see if there's questions or reactions so far to the information that was just presented on how to go about creating a messaging triangle and crafting effective messages.
Nothing in the chat right now, but I will call it out if anyone comes up with any.
There's probably so many experts on this call already. Yes.
Sorry, Andrea, we do have one question. A question from Kim. How do you decide if something is a soundbite or not?
We usually say 10 words or less, which is always hard to put in 10 words or less, but if it's tweetable, if it's quotable, a soundbite is something, reporters pull out from what you have said to feature in the published article. So just keeping it short, brief, concise, something that's quotable and memorable. And we like to tell people what would you tweet out? So I actually have our first individual activity. This one's going to be more of a multiple choice. So as you saw, I had a messaging triangle that was missing a key message. You're going to have 2 minutes, and I'll make sure to put on a timer. I can put on a little bit of background music if that helps you focus. You're going to go ahead and read the following messaging triangle focused on positive and inviting school climates. And you're going to select one of the following multiple choice questions that best supports this core message. Keep in mind, this specific example's target audience is district leaders. So this is specific to a district, and your target audience is district leaders. So we have 4 multiple choice answers here. We have A, B, C, and D, and I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to kind of read through and decide which of these might be the best fit for key message 2. And again, key message 2 explains the benefit and impact it would have on the broader school community and on students. So I'll go ahead and put 2 minutes on the timer. And after the 2 minutes, we can go ahead and share in the chat.
All right, Andrea, it looks like we have a lot of Bs. We have a few As, although a few people are wondering if A is more centering teachers or students. And then we have a few people who took your advice and went with C.
Amazing. I'm trying to navigate forward. So can I get a drum roll? And sadly, oh, thank you. Can we get a drum roll, please? So the answer was actually B, and we can go through step by step why the other ones might not have been the best fit. So answer choice A, it centers the impact on teachers rather than the students who these policies directly impact. So while teachers are the ones implementing discipline policies, there is a more asset-based way to frame this that shows how students lose out on instructional time. So for A, it might have just needed a reframe of students who are over suspended miss out on instructional time, which also allows them to miss out opportunities on building really strong relationships with teachers. So teachers really come secondary unless you're trying to get the district to implement professional development that shows teachers how to go about using positive approaches or for discipline. That could have been the case where you used it. But B is the correct answer because it does paint a clear picture of the impact it has on students, because our core message was around students, and our issue was that our students of color are being over suspended. It puts the blame on discipline policies being implemented, and it's more asset-based. C, while this message may be true, it doesn't expand on how it impacts students and school community members. So this would probably be a good third key message and call to action if it elaborated a little bit more on the specific action. It would actually make probably a good soundbite. So that's something to consider for that. And then last one, we want to call out systems and structures that are failing students, not specific people. So this could have been rewritten to the following: current district policies fail to provide students of color with safe and supportive learning environments. Any questions on this specific check for understanding? We have one more specific to sound bites.
We're all good?
Awesome. We have one more activity, but this one is not going to be multiple choice. It's actually going to be a fill in the blank. So again, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. You have, again, thanks to you all, we filled in key message 2. Now we just need to fill in that last supporting element for key message 3, which is the soundbite. You're going to have 2 minutes to create a soundbite for key message 3 that's short, succinct, and reiterates your key message in a simpler way. Keep in mind, for this specific example, again, the target audience is district leaders. So once the timer is up, we can share responses in the chat. And I'm glad someone brought up the question of sound bites. It's just kind of a shorter way that you would relay your key message 3, and maybe make it a little more punchier, exciting, quotable. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to maybe think about that. And then go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'll share 3 different ways that we could have maybe relayed message 3 as well. All right. I thought those 2 were great, definitely better than the ones I wrote, and quotable, memorable. And if Amisha's in the audience, she could also speak to this as a former journalist. But those 2 were great. They were short, memorable. The other ways you could have reframed this was: district's discipline policies don't solve the root cause of the problem. It's time to invest in different evidence-based approaches that positively impact students. So all of them sound actionable, and that's what you want out of a soundbite for key message 3, is something that's going to urge people to want to act. Another way to say it: our students of color can't afford to continue learning in harmful environments. It's time to revamp current policies to ensure every student has the opportunity to learn. And then lastly, instead of hardening our schools, our district must double down on evidence-based policies that are restorative and relationship-focused. Those were all great. These are other ways. There's hundreds of ways you can probably reframe this, but definitely something that urges people to want to take action is probably gonna be the best soundbite. So with that, what do we do now? We know how to create a messaging triangle. We know how to craft effective messages. What's next? So you always want to expect the unexpected. You want to practice your core messages and ensure you're ready to use them for any concerns or opposition that might head your way. Especially some of you might be coming from more tougher states that might be harder to pass these kinds of positive discipline policies that centers restorative practices. But practicing role play with others is a useful and helpful way to get comfortable with your core and key messages, because it's inevitable that you're going to face criticism when presenting your message. And these slides are just a way to respond to criticism and focus attention back to your main message. So there's 3 types of criticism you might face: bad information, speculation, and irrelevant questions that might be thrown your way that they want to knock you off of what you're there to relay as your core message. And the way you want to go about responding to these types of criticisms, one tactic is using bridging statements, as we like to call pivoting. These statements are just to create a bridge between the opposition's argument and your own. They bring the conversation always back to re-emphasizing your own core messages and key points. So when using a bridging statement, it's important to never reiterate the opposing argument. Instead, acknowledge that their point was shared before using a bridging statement to connect back to your messaging. So some bridging phrases can be, let me emphasize again, that reminds me, here's the real problem. I think it would be more accurate to say. So these are just a few phrases to keep in your back pocket if they ever try to throw you off of your key messages. But that's why I think the core message and key messages are so important. The more you practice them, the more you'll feel comfortable always coming back to them if something is thrown your way that you weren't expecting. And lastly, these are just some scenarios that are more specific to this dimension of positive inviting school climate. So on the left, you have maybe some probably common arguments that you might hear that might be around positive inviting school climate. One of them is we still need students to be accountable for their actions, and stringent policies ensure safety and security, or restorative practices just don't work, or parents also need to be invested in their child's behavior at school, because if parents don't care, it's hard for discipline of any kind to take hold. So if you ever come across these types of phrases or words that are more in opposition to what you're trying to relay, always using a bridging statement is really helpful, and coming back to your core key messages. So you always want to use a bridging statement, then come back to one of them that might make more sense to use in that situation. And I'll let you maybe read through these a little bit more. But every case-making deck has a specific slide on certain arguments you might hear for that specific dimension. So if it's teacher diversity and quality, there's certain narratives for that you want to take into consideration. Same for positive and inviting school climate. And with that, I want to share a QR code to all of the ARE case-making decks and resources available to use when crafting your own messages. I hope you're able to intentionally use this tool and share with community members and advocates in your own work so we can continue advocating for resource equity. I know as a former teacher and community organizer, this is a really helpful tool that I wish I had and I could use to train others. These case-making decks actually come with speaker notes. So, you know, anyone can use these, anyone can train people to use these. And yeah, thank you so much for letting me stop by and share a little bit more on how to leverage these. And look forward to talking with you all soon. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Emily, who's going to actually guide us through the last activity of the day, which will involve breaking out into breakout sessions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrea, for just providing so much helpful information. I know it was a lot, but I learned a ton about messaging and how to make sure that we're making our message clear for our audience. I think it's always really important for us to think about being in the other person's shoes of our audience. You know, we're in this work so often, and it's helpful to think about, you know, how other people are going to react to what we're telling them and making sure that they can react in a way that's positive and are getting the right information so that they can join our side. With that, we're going to just practice a little bit of what Andrea was talking about previously, which is adapting to meet your audience. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick. All right. So I realize that it's not in. There we go. So we're going to be working on adapting our messaging triangle that we just created with Andrea to our audience. So we're going to split into 2 breakout rooms, and there will be EdTrust staff in each. And you're going to get the same blank or the same filled out message triangle that we made with Andrea. And you're also going to be assigned an audience and a venue. And you're going to have to think about how to alter the message triangle that we just created to fit the audience that you've been assigned. So thinking about what that audience values, what way you're addressing them, and what you want to get out of that conversation, so that you can really think about how to strategically change your messaging to fit who you're talking to make sure that it has the impact that you want it to. After you alter those key messages, you're going to think about a supporting element that you could use to accompany them. So maybe you think that you're presenting to a school board and you think that they would really respond well to a narrative. But then maybe you want to follow that narrative up with a soundbite so they understand, you know, in a longer form what you're talking about and its impact, and then really succinctly have something that they can bring home with them. So we're thinking about how to kind of put all of this information together into a full message from key message 1 all the way to key message 3. I'm going to pause there to see if there are any questions about this before we break out. All right, I'm not seeing any, so I am going to open 2 breakout rooms. And we have a Jamboard if everyone can either scan this QR code, or we also have a link that I think Shayna, if you could post that in the chat, that'd be great, so that you can access it. And I'll be opening up the rooms right now. And all the information with the instructions and all that are also in the Jamboard, so don't worry about remembering all that. All right, we'll come back in just a few moments. Hi all, welcome back. I know that was really short and I apologize, but hopefully it gave you kind of a taste of what we can think about when we're thinking about changing messaging triangles, and that Jamboard is going to continue to be active. So if you want to continue to do that exercise by yourself, we have some more examples on there too of other audiences you could shape your triangle to. So feel free to keep using that resource. I know we just have 1 more minute today, so I just want to do a quick plug for continuing to stay in the loop with us. We have a newsletter that comes out pretty regularly, and we also have our last session in this series, which is going to be next week. It's going to be on measuring impact and maintaining momentum at the same time. So if you have some time, we really encourage you guys to jump on that one. The registration link is below. And as always, if you've ever done any of these yourself, feedback is key, and we'd love to bring you more sessions that really engage you and connected to what you guys are seeing at the local level and what you need from national orgs like us. So please provide us just a bit of feedback on how we did today. Thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate the time and energy that you gave to us today. We know that it takes some effort to be here and to engage with us. And so really thank you for doing that. As always, if you need anything from us, if there's any way that we can be supportive to your work, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We will share our information in the follow-up email. And thank you to our amazing speaker, Andrea, for all of the valuable insights she shared with us today. With that, thanks all and have a great rest of your day.